Hi, it's Richard here from the OPAHub.com, your resource for intelligent advisor content. In this brief video, we're going to talk about the JavaScript extension API, but more specifically, we're going to look at label control extensions and why, although they sound quite boring at first, they're often very useful tools when added to your interview to improve the user experience. Let's start off with the basics. What is a JavaScript control extension? It's a JavaScript file or files added to your Intelligent Advisor project. We're leveraging the public API, the Intelligent Advisor JavaScript extensions for interviews, and you're going to create a JavaScript object which will have a specific type. It's going to be a label, or it's going to be an input, or it's going to be an entity collect, and you're going to leverage methods and objects provided by the API. So you'll be able to access perhaps the interview object. You'll be able to perhaps identify the current screen and whether the current screen is complete. You'll be able to ask questions about the control that you're rendering on screen, such as the alignment or the size, depending on the extension type. There are strict rules for what we can and cannot do, so we have to make sure that we don't actually disturb the engine of the interview. What I mean is we still need to get the right answer according to our rule logic. Writing code can be a pain, so when you need to get started, you really have two choices. Write it all yourself or work with templates. You could build your own collection, or you could use something like the code generator that's available on the OPAHub.com to help you build your initial scaffolding, your initial framework to get started. When you're working with a label, you really only have three things to worry about inside your object. You need to handle mounting the label, which basically is like initializing it. You need to handle unmounting it, which is cleaning up at the end of its life cycle. And you may need to handle updates. Notice what an update really is. It's fired when anything in the interview has changed. It's not specific to your label, but it's a way to update your label if something interesting happens in your interview. We'll look at three examples later on to explain all of that. But what is a label in Intelligent Advisor? At its simplest, it's a piece of text. It could be static text that you've typed in manually. It could be a substitution attribute. It could be some dynamic text, but it's basically a piece of text. It might start out as a div tag in HTML, or a span, or a paragraph. The point is that aside from mount, unmount, and update, Intelligent Advisor is not going to handle the events of the label in any way, shape, or form. So it's not going to allow you to do an on-click. But since we're in JavaScript, you could use jQuery or JavaScript to do it instead. Anyway, so let's look at an example. I'm going to use the OPAHub.com code generator to generate some template code for a custom label. Now, one of the commonest design patterns you'll see in these extensions is some form of filtering to ensure that if you have multiple controls on the page, you only affect those that you're interested in. So I'm going to create a custom property, and I'm going to call it XLabel. And the existence of that property on a control will be the trigger for my code to run. Then I'm going to give an ID of an HTML tag, because in this generator, it assumes I want to put something on the page. So here's my code generated. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard so we can go ahead now and go into OPM. If you are interested in this tool, it also comes with a downloadable PDF guide, which helps you get a little deeper into how these extensions work. Anyway, that's beside the point. If you don't want to do this, you can always write the code yourself. So let's create a new project. And when we've created the new project, we're going to go straight into the Interview tab, and we're going to click the Styles. Because if you want to add extensions, you need to go into the Styles. Actually, let's add a new screen first, because we'll get ready for our new custom label. And in our custom label, we're going to have, obviously, a label. There you are. So this is our future custom label. That's another thing you need to understand about extensions. They're all based on existing controls. So you have to put a label on the screen if you want to customize it. Now I'm going to put in the property and the value that I used in the code generator, so that if I have on this screen more than one label, only the label or labels that have that custom property will be using my code. All the other labels will behave as normal. So this is a very important idea because you probably don't want to affect everything on your screen if you have multiple labels. Now we go into the Styles button and we click OK in the accessibility. For my demo, I'm going to switch off the accessibility warning, but it is very important to make sure that your code is fully bulletproofed for use by screen readers and other assistive technologies. I'm going to create my JavaScript file here in the created folder. I'm going to change its extension, open it up, and paste in the code that came from the code generator, and save it. So let's take a look at the code. Well, surprise, surprise. If we look carefully, we will see that it is very structured. It has a filter at the front, and it provides access to two objects in the API, namely the interview and the control. And you will see here that I'm using the filter I mentioned to avoid executing the code if these are not present on the label. Then I have my mount and my unmount, and for the purposes of this short demo, I've kept update blank, but we'll see an example with update not blank a little bit later on. In mount, this is a very simple example. You see I've simply created an HTML tag, and in that HTML tag, I'm going to put some fancy text. You'll recognize this is the ID that I specified in the code generator, so I'm going to put in some exciting text so that I'll know that this is a custom label. Great. So now that my code is ready, I'm just going to move that up to the top so we'll be able to see it in all its glory. I'm going to run the debugger, and I'm going to hopefully see the astonishingly good effect. On this screen, it now says something really exciting. That has been generated by my JavaScript extension. So the JavaScript label extension has completely replaced the standard label, but hasn't touched the other label. I'm going to make sure that this screen is always visible. I'm going to go backwards and forwards. There we go. Exciting, isn't it? And you can see that the console, in the debugger, we have a mini console available to watch our messages go by. So, fair enough. Now we've created a new label, and we want to do something with it a little more exciting than just having text on the page. What else might we do with it? Well, a label is not always a div, really. It can actually be pretty much anything you want. It could be an image or any other HTML tag that is useful for rendering semi-static data. Let's look at a couple of examples and you'll probably get the idea. So here is an example project called Emergency Response. And I've added a control to the beginning of this on the first screen, and I have added a custom property, and I've added a little bit of code. And this is an example of how useful the label control can be because of its ability to access information about the interview and information about the control itself. So you will see in this example, you'll see getScreens, a method which will return an array which is the list of currently known screens. It's important to realize that when you run this, it's not going to be the complete list of all the screens in the interview because they may not have been visited yet. And you can see a bunch of other stuff. It boils down to here, you can see manipulating a div and adding some concatenated text. So this is a single div, which is actually bringing lots of information to the user. Well, in this case, it's not particularly interesting. It's more for debugging, but let's take a good look. So in the debugger, you'll see here that I have, when I reset this, on the first page, a bunch of information about the screen, how many screens there are, whether the screen is complete, and so forth, and with the name of the stage and what have you. So I could just get the console out of the way for a moment, and I'll move forward, and you'll see that as I move forward, the information obviously is updated. Great, because I've put the label on every screen, so I can see this as it evolves, and I can also see in the console my debugging messages are passing through. So it's an example of how a label could be something for debugging purposes, or could be simply to provide information to the user or the tester. Great. So what else can you do with a label? Let's keep working with emergency response and see another screen that's been adapted. You may recall that this example project uses the location ability of your browser to capture latitude and longitude. So why not display a map? In this case, it's a Leaflet.js and Mapbox map, and it includes a clickable marker so that your user can check and see what they're doing at this location. So as before, this is a label, and it has a custom property with a value, and behind it is some code. And let's go look at the JavaScript. Nothing of any great difficulty here. Simply put, we are going to recover the latitude and longitude, but the most of the amount is involved in loading the necessary JavaScript libraries to make this work once we've built an initial div. So you'll notice that we get value of the latitude and longitude, and then we make a call to an engine to render the tiles of the map. A third example, and perhaps quite an interesting one, is that in this case, we have another screen of the same project which we've adapted, and in here you'll notice references to Google Trans. That should be enough to make you think of Google Translate. So this particular screen has a label whose only job is to ensure that Google Translate library is loaded and is tagged on one of the other controls on the screen. So actually it's this big piece of text that you saw on the first page that's been changed by it. If you're doing this and you notice that the built-in debugger doesn't behave well, this often happens, you get this spinner, if you're dynamically changing the content of a page in the built-in debugger. So just use Control F5 to spawn a session in the browser so you can test it. And you can see in this case that we've been able to tag this paragraph of long text and turn it into a translatable paragraph. And we can see that it's Google Translate because we have all the functionality that you'd expect. So in this case, the label isn't really doing anything itself. It's actually affecting something else on the page. We have to be careful with this so that we don't really change how the interview behaves. But we could say that a label could be therefore another tag, and we've given a couple of examples. We've also seen there just now that a label could essentially be nothing visible. It's used to drive an effect somewhere else on the screen. Be careful of using this. Make sure that you use Control F5 to debug, and make sure that you are not affecting how the rule engine works. Before we go on any further, therefore, it's probably worthwhile summarizing what we know so far. A label extension, we've seen two main keys, mount and unmount, and it basically puts information on a screen. The label as a map being one of the biggest examples because it turns an empty space into something that's very useful. The map API, which is independent of Intelligent Advisor, even included a marker and a clickable zone, so you could click on the marker. But in a sense, we were just depending upon an external API. We were able to pass values from Intelligent Advisor into the map, so we can handle attributes in our project and push them into the map coordinates, for example. In the next examples, we're going to look at more uses of a label, and we're also going to focus on the other key, the update. So what an update means for a label and what it means for us as developers. Let's find out. So the update key helps us as developers manage whenever our extension might need to be updated. It's important to realize that the code you write in the update key of this object will fire whenever anything changes in the interview. So it's more a kind of event that signals to you that something has changed in the interview, so you might want to change your label, if you will. A simple example will help. In the following, we will change the background of the label whenever the code is fired. So let's see what that actually means. So in this sample project, I have added 2 input attributes and 1 conclusion, as you can see here, and I have added them to a screen. And I've also included, of course, a custom label. And that custom label, as usual, has a custom property with a value. So the input attributes just do some silly calculation. It's of no importance. Let's go and have a look at our code. The code is actually the original code from the first example, except I've added here in the update a random color generator. So the background color of the label will be changed each time the update code fires. So it'll help us identify when the code is firing. So let's run the debugger and make this full screen, and let's experiment with it. So as you can see, my label here has a green background to start off with. I'm now going to go and change one of the integer attributes, which is the Boolean. You will see that I have a new color, so the update is fired. And when I change the value, or when I add a value to the numeric attribute, I also get a new color. So the label is being affected by whatever is happening in the interview. But it's not just about attributes and conclusions. If I start using the navigation buttons, for example, well, let's remove this value as well, so you can see that removing a value has fired the update as well. When I try and navigate, I won't be able to navigate because there's a missing mandatory value, but you'll also notice that the color has changed. And every time I click, I'm getting a new update firing. So it's really a signal to you as the developer that something has happened in the interview. It could be that it's a navigational thing, or it could be that a new value has been added to a property, to an input attribute, or a conclusion has been met. You don't really have any clarity as to what's happened, and you would need to assess the values of an attribute or study the current screen to try and work out whether you need to update your label. Because let's face it, it may be that you don't need to update your label every time the update is fired. If we look at the console, you'll see just how often the update has been firing. And in a complex project, it will be firing on any given screen lots and lots of times because there'll be lots and lots of things that are changing. So hopefully this little viewpoint has given you an idea that the update event is not quite what it seems. So let's finish off with a summary. We've been looking at label extensions for our interview. We've been using the Intelligent Advisor JavaScript extension API. And we've seen that label extensions can range from the simplest to some of the most complex. Be aware, however, that one thing that a label won't do is validate anything, because there's no concept of data entry within a label. You're just showing stuff. If you're interested in taking this further, then the book, JavaScript Extensions for Policy Modeling, contains all these examples shown here and a bunch more, both in the text and downloadable zip file format. Hopefully this has been useful to you. Thanks very much, and see you on the opahub.com sometime soon.